Welcome to this week's news report. I'm your host, Diana Longry. Thank you for tuning in. This program is brought to you weekly, and to help me with this week's news is my co-anchor, Mr. Kevin Berglund. Thank you, Mr. Berglund, for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Now, we have just returned from an investigative field trip out to Richmond, Virginia. Over the past month or so, we have been following the Policy and Advisory Committee for the Rush Line. And we started by going to their meeting that was held in July. And at that meeting, they were talking about the opportunity they had to go on a field trip to Richmond, Virginia, to observe the BRT that's in Richmond, Virginia, to talk to the policy people and to talk to the engineers and other staff people involved in implementing the BRT. Well, this, of course, is a very fascinating topic to us because it was presented at that meeting of the Policy and Advisory Committee that the only difference between the BRT in Richmond, Virginia, and the BRT that's being proposed for the Rush Line, or the Purple Line as they call it, that is slated to go up and down the Bruce Vento Trail, that the only difference between these two BRT routes is that the one in Richmond, Virginia is operational and is currently serving the community. Well, now, we being here on this program, we could have thought of many other ways that the two BRTs were different, or that the communities were different that were being served. Mr. Berglund, didn't it strike you odd that the only difference that they identified for the committee members was that the one in the BRT in Richmond, Virginia was operational and the one here in Ramsey County is not?
Ramsey County Rail Authority building this rush line on the Bruce Vento Trail made it sound like the one in Richmond, Virginia, in downtown Richmond, Virginia. The downtown Richmond, Virginia is also the capital of Virginia. These two lines were like kissing cousins. There was no difference. Now, of course, I guess that's the one similarity they do have. They're both in, or at least originate in, the capital city of a state. In Virginia, they're in Richmond. In Minnesota, it starts in St. Paul. Of course, the whole Richmond, Virginia one is completely in Richmond. And in St. Paul, it just starts in St. Paul, then quickly goes into the city of Maplewood.
Right.
So even there's a difference. And I think we're trying to find the similarities.
And we are very hard pressed to do so. But we wanted to investigate to see for ourselves. So as I indicated, we have just returned from Richmond, Virginia, and I had an opportunity to observe the BRT, had the opportunity for a whole hour to talk with one of the chief engineering architects of the BRT in Richmond, Virginia. We had the opportunity of interviewing Daryl, who was participating in the field trip. But before we get into all of that and that film footage, we want to review some of our clips from our archives to bring you up to date as to how we got here today and connect the dots for you. So let's get started with our first film clip, which is from that July meeting where it was first talked about by Ramsey County staff Andy what the purpose of this field trip was to be for the committee members.
Pure region system trip to Richmond, Virginia. And I'm actually going to turn it over to Cassie, who's going to walk through the details of this trip. From past experience on other projects, these are often great opportunities to learn from what others have done well and learn from where others maybe would have done something differently, an opportunity to meet with leadership and take that information back to help to make a stronger rush line project that reflects the needs of.
So from Andy's perspective, the purpose of this field trip is to talk to leaders to find out what they did right, what they would like to do differently if they had the chance to do it all over again. And I'm thinking, Mr. Berglund, a BRT, after all, is just a different type of bus. Why couldn't they do a Skype meeting or a Zoom meeting or some other kind of electronic meeting if they're going to be talking to members of the leadership and of the staff to just simply talk about what they learned from their initiation of this process and this transportation in their community?
Well, that seems to be, there are bus rapid transits in different parts of the United States, and if they did want to meet those goals, which this director says they do, the executive director of this rush line says, they would want to talk to more than just what's going on the bus rapid transit in Richmond, Virginia. They'd want to talk to the people, the leadership in maybe Grand Rapids, Michigan, or maybe Cleveland, Ohio, or the other spots to see if they could find any similarity in one of those places, because although they presented these two as kindred spirits and they had some lofty goals to find out, it seems like, or you want to ask the question, is it any more than really just a junket down to a nice warm southern state to knock around and hang out for a while? Are they really there to learn, to take in the issues, and to actually find out if there is at all any similarities? And of course this meeting is over at the Maplewood Community Center, and you can see there's Ramsey County Commissioner Vicki Reinhardt, who is kind of sitting right next to him, and then the mayor of White Bear Lake. So it's a whole crew of people in the community who are in responsible positions, who are sitting there at this meeting, floating right along, not advocating to find out what is the kindred spiritness of Richmond, Virginia. Why are we really going there? And why not, at the very least, if we're going to go there because we want to see what it really is all about, why haven't we done any homework so when we get down there we can really do a probe and we can really understand what's going on, instead of going down there basically uninformed as a governmental body and then listening for a few hours, then taking back off. It doesn't seem like they're really doing their due diligence and doing their duty.
And,
at least to the spirit, to what he claims they are.
And to piggyback on that, online we found under the rush line documents the minutes from the last citizen community outreach group that they have formed so that they can say that they've got community input into the development of the rush line. And one of the committee members of that community group asked that very question that you have posed, Mr. Berglund. What is it about the Richmond, Virginia area that makes it similar to what we are doing here at for the rush line, for along the Bruce Fenno Trail? What makes it similar? What are the similarities between Richmond, Virginia, and the community going to be served by the rush line? And in the minutes, it details those detailed questions and the detailed answers. The detailed answer was, well, we really don't have that information for you today. We'll get back to you. Now, of course, this is something that if this is their day-to-day job, they should have at the tip of their tongue, what are the similarities? What are the differences? Why was this site selected over Grand Rapids, Michigan, which is every bit as award-winning as the Richmond, Virginia site is? So you see, you've brought out a very good point in that it does seem like it's just an opportunity to go on a junket to a very nice community that had very nice weather. And by the way, while we were there for the week, it was in the 90s the whole entire time. And it was balmy. It was wonderful. It's a gorgeous community. Richmond, Virginia is very nice. Next time I want to go back there as a tourist rather than a reporter. But I will tell you, those folks, when they went there, they were going there as tourists because they were not prepared, I don't think, as Mr. Berglund indicated, for asking any tough questions.
It seems very odd that, as you said, professional governmental planners, Ramsey County, the special group of Ramsey County officials that are doing the rush lines, the city of Maplewood, the city of White Bear Lake, and all these planners being paid big government salaries didn't at least brief everyone in some sort of systematic, at the very least, in some sort of systematic way, so they could go down there and look at just different aspects.
Because here in this meeting, that would have been a great opportunity that they could have had a briefing packet in July that would have set forth, even just on a page or two, what are the similarities, what are the differences, what are the takeaways we're looking for, what are some key suggested questions that you could be asking policymakers. I mean, because all of this stuff has to be spoon-fed to these members, I believe, because they never seem to have any questions, so maybe the staff needs to give them questions to ask. Now, as we move on to our next clip, this is during the same meeting where another staff person who is supposed to be giving that kind of information is before the members, and let's hear how in-depth her briefing is of them in preparation for the junket to Richmond, Virginia.
And committee members, I'm sure you might have heard that we are planning a trip to visit a peer project in Richmond, Virginia from October 2nd to 4th. Their project there is called the GRTC Pulse BRT. It opened in 2018 and it runs about 7 miles and is very similar to our plans for the rush lines. Like the rush line, it connects suburban communities to retail, healthcare services, and business and government center downtown. And let's see, I've got a little more information. The next slide.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks. We also, the key difference, I guess, between the rush line and the Pulse is that the Pulse is currently in operation. So we can go see it in action and talk to project leaders, stakeholders, and the folks currently operating it and learn a lot from their experience. So we think it's a really great opportunity to learn what they've already learned for us. I've got a system map here that shows that, like the rush line, it operates both in dedicated lane, which is that this purple area. Oh no, wait, that's where it runs in mixed traffic. But then as it enters into downtown, it goes into a center running dedicated lane. And then down here in downtown proper, it runs in a bad lane. So curbside, that business exit transit lanes. Since they've opened in 2018, they've also had double their expected ridership. So we're hoping to learn a lot about their success not only with ridership, but with economic development around the corridor, and how they are managing that high demand. I also have a video too, just to give you a better idea. Now, fingers crossed that I can get it to work.
Are they electric buses or not?
Actually, it's compressed natural gas. So we have one up on them on that. Let's see. Just get out of the presentation here. Oh.
Mr. Berglund, now that we've been there to Richmond, Virginia, and we've seen the pulse, and we now go back and listen to this video clip from our archive, we can point to so much more than we pointed to the first time around when we discussed this discussion and this clip. She indicates that the pulse, like the rush line, connects suburban communities to medical and retail. But Mr. Berglund, you have identified, rightly so, that the pulse is only in Richmond, Virginia. It does not go to any suburbs. So it doesn't connect the suburbs to Richmond, Virginia any differently than the bus that runs parallel to it along the same streets connects the suburbs to Richmond, Virginia via you just getting a transfer ticket so that you can get on a different bus to go into the suburbs. That's not much of a connection to the suburbs.
No, and in fact, in Richmond, Virginia, if you are going to have a partnership with the suburbs, you would have to have at the end terminals, you would have to, or you would be required to have a park and ride so that people coming in from the suburbs would have a park and ride, or perhaps a bus center or something where they could enter this. But on each side, on the west side and on the east side, there's no park and ride at all. There's
For
no
the
bus
Pulse.
for the Pulse in Richmond, Virginia. The Pulse is the bus rapid transit. Another interesting comment about what she said this connects retail, healthcare, government. The one thing she seemed to miss, and I didn't see really much of any of that, although there was some government buildings around there. I don't know if it did any connecting with government, the state capitol, with a local mall, because if I recall, there was no local mall on the route. It was more of just some small shops similar to what you would see on University Avenue. But what it did do, she seemed to have missed completely. It was a transit vehicle for people at the University of Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia University, which has many campus areas along that route. So it seems odd that the one thing that it does serve, and it seems to serve it in a very efficient way, is completely unmentioned. It's as if in the Minnesota case, you have the St. Paul campus, you have the East Bank campus, you have the West Bank campus, and a bus rapid transit that would run from that campus to that campus would similarly have a lot of connectivity for the students who are using it. And I think that's what it serves for in a big part in Richmond, Virginia.
Exactly.
Except there is more campus stops, it seems, that than just 3, like there would potentially be in Minnesota.
And I would say that probably along at least 1/3 of the route for the BRT in Richmond, Virginia, it is flanked by campus belonging to the college.
Right.
And she mentioned that they have doubled their ridership over what their projections were, and that this advisory committee is going to hopefully learn how they did that. Well, we think we discovered how they did that because in talking to one of the project managers, and we'll have that interview the next show, but in the interview with him, he talked about the process that was for the feasibility study that was worked through before they implemented the BRT, and that they had a certain projected number of riders. But I don't think that at that time they contemplated that there was going to be an agreement with the university that every student who goes to the university, that inserted into the costs of their tuition or their fees is a permanent pass to ride the Pulse BRT in Richmond, Virginia. And so we believe that that agreement came after the projected ridership numbers were determined. And so how they increased their ridership was by working out an agreement with the college that all students had to pay a fee in their tuition or part of their fees that covered their free riding on the BRT. Well, suddenly now you've got the whole population of the university buying a permanent pass indirectly. Imagine that. And every one of them could be counted as a rider, whether they ride or not, because they've paid. That's how you double your ridership. You work out an agreement with some other governmental entity to foot the bill. How simple.
And it's interesting that in the Rush Line case, the one on the Rush Line is the one they want to spend from $500 million to $1 billion. I've never seen a nailed down figure of what that would cost. I don't believe there's any university at all or any college along that track. Now, I think Nora Salwick, who the governor made chair of the Metropolitan Council, while she was campaigning, as the city mayor of Maplewood, and I think actually trying to campaign for this Metropolitan Council chair office with the potential governor, she pretended or seemed to put a rumor out there, which many people in Maplewood seem to pick up on, that the failing Maplewood Mall was a big plan of that was to make it into some sort of school, implying, I guess, that maybe we will, when we knock down the Maplewood Mall or we renovate the Maplewood Mall, we're going to make that part of the University of Minnesota or some lesser branch, some state college of the University of Minnesota. And so it's as if, and who knows, because Nora Salwick does not answer questions, at least when she was the mayor of Maplewood, who knows if they were pretending for whatever reason that in their federal grant or whatever kind of planning they were doing, that the similarity with Richmond, Virginia would be, is that the failing Maplewood Mall would be the future home of the center of the University of Minnesota.
Or some other educational institution. And that's a very accurate. And if we hadn't have gone to Richmond, Virginia to investigate this, we would have never known this, because they aren't talking about the fact that the university is on the route and that all of the students, as part of their fees and tuition, are obligated to have to pay for a permanent ticket. Now, she also mentioned this issue about economic development. Well, yes, the university was building and they were developing. We saw new buildings going up around on the university campus connected by the BRT pulse there in Richmond, Virginia. We did see that. And so perhaps, yes, there's economic development in Richmond, Virginia in relation to the BRT and the campus that's there. But along the route, it's the same mom and pop shops that look to me like they've been there forever. And I will show you the film footage, and then you'll be able to determine on your own what you think. But to me, it looked like the same mom and pop shops that have been along their main broad street for a long time.
And it's, as you mentioned, it looks as if the development is actually at the university, at the university's, this is the home of the Commonwealth of Virginia's medical school and hospitals, the schools, universities, hospitals. What's interesting,
And I think that's an important point to make. It's not just a university. I mean, this is a major medical university and has a hospital there.
right, home of the largest medical school in Virginia.
Right.
Very similar to the University of Minnesota Medical School.
And so when she was saying how it's connecting people to, medical facilities, well, yeah, it's the largest medical school in the state of Virginia. And they have a hospital there. And clinicals.
And what's odd, just less than a mile away from the end of the line, there is a healthcare institution, the Blue Cross Blue Shield, big corporate headquarters in that area, Anthem. And there's another big employer out there, similarly placed, Philip Morris, or they now have a parent company, Philip Morris Cigarettes parent company, Altria, and they didn't, who are obviously huge economic growth development places for Richmond, Virginia. And the line did not go to either the Blue Cross affiliate or the Philip Morris parent company, Altria, or any of the other big job economic growth incentives. Instead, it went through areas that were just regular small businesses, similar to what you would find along much of the University Avenue.
Right.
And if any comparison was to be made, similarity, you would have to say that there is relationships is what goes on the Green Line in St. Paul. And I think when you reflect back on what they did in St. Paul and the largeness of Richmond, Virginia, they probably made a big, large error on University Avenue. Instead of putting a light rail there, the Green Line, it would have been more suited, more economically efficient, more cost efficient to put a bus rapid transit.
Right.
And then as many businesses would have not been taken out by what happened with the Green Line. Although, if you do, I don't know, they said they were talking to stakeholders. I never know if stakeholders means the ones that are making money out of all this are able to buy a lot of stakes, or if it actually means the riders. Because when she talked about it, she didn't talk about the riders or the residents, but the residents we talked to actually were not very happy with it.
The residents in Richmond, Virginia.
Absolutely.
Right, because we talked to a lot of people in Richmond, Virginia about the pulse, about the BRT. Some of them were like, no, I've never ridden that thing.
Right.
And others were like, nah, that was a waste of money. And others were like, they really didn't have an opinion.
And the difference, a huge astronomical difference is that in Richmond, Virginia, they didn't tear up the whole road like they did on University Avenue when they put the light rail in. They went down the street and they brought their paint and they painted some dedicated lines and wrote in the middle of those lanes, bus only.
Well, and you're jumping ahead because we've got the film footage so that you can go along the route and you'll be able to see what we saw. But I do want to go back to that meeting of July of the advisory committee, where they're finishing up with their presentation on what the members can expect on their junket when they go to Richmond, Virginia. Let's take a look.
Audio on? Oh, well.
It's just background music.
Oh, okay, yeah, so play some music in your head. Here it is in action. Those are those center running, dedicated. Oh, yes, sorry. I should have done that.
Are there any closed captions too?
Oh,
It's
yes.
apparently just music.
Yeah, it is just music, yeah. And some cheering in that basketball scene. But yeah, it's just a brief, and so all of the committee members should have received a invite that includes a link to the project website that has more videos than you would ever want, or you could spend the whole evening if you wanted. How do I get out? That'll work. I'll just go ahead and close that.
There you go.
Okay. Woo. Thanks. Yes. So that's pretty much it. I think I went back from the beginning. Geez, I'm sorry, but basically, logistics.
I'll take it from here.
Logistically, we are offering stipends to help defray the cost of travel. I would refer you to the email you received. There's links to, you will have to book your own flight, but we have a room block at downtown hotel right up Line Reserve. So reach out if you have any questions.
The hotel room block that they had was at the downtown Hilton, right off of the BRT route. Now, this whole presentation about what they are to expect is void of any information whatsoever. And I had the feeling that when we spoke for an hour with Steve, the project manager in Richmond, Virginia, he had a lot of questions about the rush line, as if they had never briefed him either as to what to expect of these folks who were coming from Minnesota. We talked to him the day before he gave his presentation to them, and we'll have more on that in our next program. But at this meeting that we have the film footage from now, in July of 2017, after the presentation was given to the committee members, then Sue Vento, who is our representative for the Maplewood area, she's our representative to the Metropolitan Council, she speaks up that she's not able to go, but she has an opinion on who she believes should go on this junket. Let's take a look.
As our Ramsey County point person, organizing the trip and all logistics. So
Yes, thank you.
you said the questions for her.
Good job, Cassie.
Thank you. Madam Chair, I'm not able to attend, but I have a request as far as the plan. I hope that the stakeholders include riders. I think it would be really good to get their viewpoint on it. And a question of all of the stakeholders, what would you do differently now that you've had this experience? So that, what have you learned that you want to pass on to us?
Absolutely.
I think that would be really beneficial.
So that is Sue Vento, representative on the Metropolitan Council, saying that she would like to have stakeholders attend this junket who are not on the committee, who are riders of the bus or the BRT or whatever. Okay, sounds like a reasonable idea. Well, we know who one of those non-committee members are because we, of course, interviewed him at that meeting and he confirmed that he was going. Let's take a look.
Kevin.
Daryl, how you doing?
Hey, how are you doing?
Good, good. Hey, are you going to go out there to Virginia with them?
I am.
Good,
I'm one of the writers.
good.
Speak about when they say they want more writers involved.
Yeah, well, because, you know, most of the people on these boards are all millionaires. Vicki Reinhardt, she's a public... Are you a millionaire?
No, I drive that rusty minivan out there.
Thank you.
And Daryl, of course, the gentleman who's in the purple shirt with the hat, he confirmed that he was going on the junket and that he affirmed that Sue Vento said that they have to have more riders go and view this and be part of this. He confirmed that that's what Sue Vento said. So it isn't just us making this up. So we, of course, later on tried to talk to Andy, who's running these meetings from Ramsey County, about their meetings and what's public and are members of the public welcome. So let's take a look at that clip.
Let's take a break.
Is that public or is that private? Is that public or is that private?
It's public, I mean, this wouldn't be something that goes in meetings, built, so it's after the adjournment. But all our meetings.
Now, of course, Andy was speaking about the informal meeting that was being held after the meeting that was just adjourned. But the philosophy and the theory holds the same. Because Mr. Berglund, didn't he say that all of their meetings, even if they're not public, are open to the public, correct?
Wow, I think that came out of his mouth. Or did somebody just dub that in?
You know, my editing skills are not that good.
I guess, knowing the cynicism that people look at politicians with, maybe all what he said, he's twisted it around or interpreted it in some way. But I thought, just listening on the face value, it was very clean and very plain. And I don't think, I mean, he's the one who put that in.
Right.
He wasn't
because he went that next extra step,
Yes.
beyond the fact that a meeting that has been posted and is a public meeting is open to the public. He went that next step to say that that meeting, which is basically an unofficial meeting that they're getting together with, is open to the public. Right. And that you could be there as a reporter, that you could be there to record that meeting, to observe the discussions. And you did. You stayed. We got film footage of it. We've discussed it. We've presented it on these news programs. All of our viewers know that they talked about how to spin the PR message when they're out and about talking to the public. And they got the key points on how to do that so that way they don't look like they got egg in their face. We were there. And so he said, then they get together and they have a meeting. Yeah, of course, it's open to the public. So wouldn't you think that if they all are congregating together in a junket, going to some place to observe something that is pertinent to the business at hand, obtaining information that they're going to bring back, that they're going to use in their decision making, that those meetings, even though they're in a different city, would also be open to the public?
And this meeting, would you call this a meeting they had here at the Maplewood Community Center? They didn't take minutes. They didn't have a recording secretary. They didn't make a audio recording. They didn't make a video recording.
Right. So in other words, you're saying that's not the measurement stick. That a meeting that's open to the public is not being measured by whether or not they take minutes, right, or they take notes, or that they have any kind of record of what they did. That's not the yardstick we're using here. So that would mean that a junket where they all go somewhere to meet with other people to talk about a topic of what their business is would be a meeting open to the public. Well, of course, we did not expect that, unlike the folks going on this junket, that they were going to get a stipend to pay for their travel, to pay for their Hilton hotel room, because you heard her say they've got stipends for them all. So certainly we were not expecting to have stipends. I called up Andy. Actually, I called up a different person who I was given the number for, and that guy, he didn't want to answer and have to call me back. So he forwarded it to Andy so Andy could deal with me. So Andy called me back and left me a voice message that indicated that I wasn't welcome. Even if I was, as I indicated in my message to the his co-worker, that I'm a rider of the BRT. I've ridden the BRT, as Mr. Berglund has, in Lima, Peru, and Bogota, Colombia, and other communities. We have as much knowledge about BRTs and how they can operate as most people here in Ramsey County, and that we were willing to pay our own way. So let's hear what Andy had to say.
This is Andy Gitzloff with Ramsey County. Co-workers forwarded your message about inquiring about the Rush Line Richmond Pearson review trip in October. I just wanted to follow up and clarify that that invite went out to only community policy and technical advisory committee members for that invite. There was limited space on the trip, and this trip isn't a public meeting either. If there's any additional questions that you have, feel free to reach out to me directly at 651-266-277. Thank you.
So now he says that even though they're all meeting together, it's not a public meeting. And don't show up.
Ramsey County, transparency, Ramsey County style.
Yeah.
We want process, we want engagement, we want transparency.
And he was
the leader of the transparency movement there.
And he was very clear that it's only members of the Policy Advisory Committee are attending. He was very clear. Now, Mr. Berglund, I know that you brought your phone with you.
Yes.
And what does Mr. Berglund have on his phone? Well, you know, we were able to, after we talked to Steve, the project manager of the BRT, the Pulse there in Richmond, Virginia, we were able to then go to the City Hall of Richmond, Virginia, because originally we were told that Steve was going to be giving his presentation the next morning at City Hall. And we went to City Hall and we could find no evidence of them meeting at City Hall. So we went to the mayor's office. The mayor's office and the clerk's office, well, first of all, I guess we went to the clerk's office. She couldn't find anything, so she sent us over to the mayor's office.
The mayor of Richmond, Virginia.
The mayor of Richmond, Virginia, and they were all very gracious. And they made some calls, and they determined, oh, they're all meeting at the Hilton. Why forever would Steve tell you that he was meeting at City Hall when he's actually at the Hilton? They were scratching their head, wondering why that would happen. Well, I'll let you figure that one out. But anyway, we went just a few blocks down the way, and there at the Hilton, we went to the Hilton, and we thought we'd just sit in the lobby for a while, because since we'd already talked to Steve for an hour and found out everything that we knew that he was probably going to be talking about at his talk, we thought, well, we'll just wait in the lobby and wait for them to come down for lunch or whatever. Well, in the meantime, Mr. Berglund decided that he had to go around a corner to another area, And lo and behold, we found our friend Daryl. And Daryl was very happy to see us, and he had heard from Steve that we were there. So he was expecting to see us. So he suggested that he and Kevin do a selfie. So you got your selfie there? There we go. So we want to thank...
Down at the Hilton in Richmond, Virginia, right outside the meeting area of the Policy Technical Committee. And by the way, was Daryl, or the Policy Advisory Committee, was Daryl on the Policy Advisory Committee?
No, I don't believe that Daryl is on the Policy Advisory Committee, but he is one of those stakeholders, those people that ride the bus and the BRT that Sue Vento was saying that they should have more of, who want to ride the BRT and go on that field trip in order to put their 2 cents in to help with the visualization of what they're doing in Ramsey County.
And of course, Sue Vento is on the Metropolitan Council. One of her best buddies, Nora Salwick, campaign made, picked Sue Vento to be on the Metropolitan Council. And Nora Salwick is the chair, and they're the ones who eventually will take over this rush line, purple line through Maplewood. Why isn't Andy, the question is, why isn't Andy paying any attention to Sue Vento, a member of this Policy Advisory Committee, whose best buddy is the chair of the Metropolitan Council? Give me the explanation. There has to be one alternative why that occurs.
Right. Well, now let's move on to our film footage. And we've got lots of film footage, but this is at least to wet your whistle to get an understanding of the BRT route in Richmond, Virginia. And if you're familiar with the Bruce Vento Trail here in St. Paul, Maplewood, and then going out to White Bear Lake, you know that a great portion of where the rush line is going is in an area that is in the back of people's backyards, single family homes, not commercial properties, not retail properties, not along roadways, not until you get out of Maplewood and you get into White Bear Lake does it go to Highway 61.
And not through any university campuses.
And
not through the main campus of the state of Minnesota.
That's right. So let's start our film footage and we'll talk over it and walk you through what you're seeing. Here, of course, is we are driving down Broad Street, and you can see there's the regular highway stoplights. Over to the left there is the lane that is used for bus only. And for those who have to turn, you'll see that they have a turn lane, and they actually have to wait then for the bus to go through. So the bus doesn't actually really have priority except for with regard to those cars that are turning to go in the next street.
So in other words, the bus has to stop at the stoplights.
Yes.
They don't change the stoplights.
And you can see here along this section of Broad Street, okay, there's a station that we're just stopping by right now that is in the middle of this big, huge street, Broad Street. And you'll see that there's high density housing, there's parking ramps, there's office buildings. This is down near where the university campus is. So this is what you're looking at, are buildings that are all part of that whole campus area. And from there then, it then gets into Richmond, Virginia, where in the heart of Richmond, Virginia, where then you pass City Hall. Now this is one of the buses. This is a Pulse bus here. Okay, and it stopped at a light. It didn't get to go because it had its own signal. And again, more high density housing. But again, this is associated with the college. Regular traffic. Now, do we see any ecological greenway along here that's been devastated to put in this bus rapid transit route?
Well, it looks like, to me, this is the same kind of ecological greenway that University Avenue is in St. Paul, Minnesota.
Except they're different businesses. Because doesn't this, that's exactly it. Doesn't this look like University Avenue? Here we go, and here's the pulse going back the other way. So you can see where there's two lanes. There's one going in one direction, one going in the other. And you've got just your regular traffic. And again, just regular commercial buildings along this route, just like University Avenue. Here we are starting up next to a pulse next to us. So you get a real good view of what that bus looks like.
Pretty
Now,
much looks like any other city bus.
That's right, and it's just a regular bus lane at this point. Now, one thing I tried to observe was how many people are riding the pulse, and I think it depends on the time of day. Because certainly when we were closer to the university area, during the daytime, there was a lot of people getting on and off, as you would expect.
Right in the middle of the campus, in other words.
Yes. But then at the end of the day, we went to the very end of it, which is on the, before Richmond, Virginia, their outside, their border where it's not Richmond, Virginia anymore. And the ridership was down markedly. Only a couple of people getting on the bus at that time, which was about 7:30 at night. Because what was the reason to go downtown Richmond, Virginia at 7:30 at night? You know, on Friday night, it was a little bit more busy because it was Friday night and people were going downtown to go to the bars and restaurants. Now that, of course, was a station that we just passed. And then you can see the station on the other side. So there were certain areas of this broad street where they were able to put the stations that you get on in the middle of the roadway. And then the other areas, the stations were on the side. So the buses actually had to weave in and out from going in a lane that was in the middle of this big roadway to then moving over to have to get over to a side station and being in the right-hand lane.
In other words, on this road, there is a concrete barrier in the middle of this road, in the middle of Broad Street. And I do not think you see that in a lot of
and it was more like a median.
Median lane that just separated the traffic going east versus the traffic going west. It was a median for if you were to cross the street, you could stand in the middle of the street because you can't just stand in a big, wide, busy road right in the middle of the street balancing on the double yellow line.
Yeah.
So there is a small median, a concrete median that you can stand on, and the bus actually has to cross that median to get into the station when the station is in the middle of the road, at least going one direction.
Right, so so they have a break in it.
Right.
They have a break, a cut through so that the bus can get through there to get in there like a sort of like a slot car.
Yes.
In those old racetracks where you had slot cars. And so it was fascinating. We used the machines that they had at the platforms to get our tickets. And of course, that was all very easy. That worked very well. And there were, in some of the rides that we took, there were people who were on the bus checking to make sure that you had your ticket. Other times, there wasn't anybody checking to see if you had your ticket. It appeared that it was more likely that they had somebody on the bus checking to see if you had your ticket on Friday night than it was on Thursday night.
Meaning they just had, instead of just a driver, because every bus needs a driver, they have the driver on the bus who doesn't take fares because the fares are prepaid, but they have another employee who rides on the bus that checks your ticket as you get on the bus. So instead of having one employee on the bus, they have 2 employees on the bus, and that might be the economic aspect. Now, like you said, that did not occur at all the times, we do not believe, but at certain times it did.
Right. But I will say that that second individual who was on the bus when he was on the bus to check tickets, he did something that I thought was, I don't know if it's a policy or if it's just something that he individually decided that that's the way he wanted to do it. He actually went outside of the bus and asked to see people's tickets when they were getting on, rather than standing inside the bus and then looking at the tickets while people were getting on.
Or in their seats.
Right.
And saying, no, that ticket's not going to work. Get the cops here, we're going to pull you off.
Right.
And of course, that would slow the whole system down anyway.
Yeah, and so by doing it outside of the bus like that, then people could have their tickets ready. If you knew that you were being checked and you didn't have a ticket, or you had a wrong ticket or an expired ticket, you had that chance you could just turn around and leave gracefully without somebody making a big ruckus on the bus that you are on there illegally. So it was actually a more kinder, friendly way of checking tickets, but it involves, like you said, 2 people, because the bus driver can't get out of his seat and do it that way. You could only do it that way if you have a second person who's riding that bus.
And one thing that Daryl mentioned to me, Daryl, if you recall, is the one person who was a rider of the bus system. He said he witnessed or testified to me that the thing that he noticed is what he can bring back is that the bus drivers and the employees, when they took their sample run of the bus, they were kinder, more patient, more helpful. He called it Southern charm. And from his opinion was, he will bring that back, that they need to work on improving the customer service and the quality of the how they treat their riders in the Twin Cities, because he noticed that in Richmond, Virginia, there was a far better standard of patience and helpfulness and courtesy and politeness, all things that was the big takeaway. But when he said about the ease of use of the bus system, the ease of, and he is in a wheelchair, and of the cumbersomeness of getting it on, and the other factors that go if you ride the bus, it was just as poor as it is in the Twin Cities.
So basically, a bus is a bus is a bus. And they went to Richmond, Virginia to see how you can paint your lanes on the bituminous in front of you, how you can make artsy stations, bus stations, and how a bus is a bus. Well, we're going to have more of this in our next newscast because we have so much more. This is just the tip of the iceberg. But we're at the end of our program. And we hope you've enjoyed this. Mr. Berglund, thank you for being here and helping with this report.
Thanks for having me.
And please stay tuned next week for more. Bye-bye.